Jimmy Hoffa was not just another labor leader. He was a man who rose from poverty to become one of the most powerful figures in American history. Born on February 14, 1913, in Brazil, Indiana, Hoffa grew up during the Great Depression. His father died when he was still a boy, and by the time he was a teenager, Hoffa had left school to help support his family. He learned early that the world of work was unfair. Long hours, low pay, and no protections. This drove him into the labor movement, where he discovered both his talent for organizing workers and his hunger for influence. In the 1930s, Hoffa joined the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a union that represented truck drivers and warehouse workers. At the time, the Teamsters were small, scattered, and often bullied by employers. Hoffa was fearless, and he quickly earned a reputation for standing up to powerful companies. He understood people, especially working-class men, who felt forgotten. He had charisma, a sharp tongue, and a willingness to take risks. Soon, Hoffa climbed the union ranks, and by the 1950s, he had become a national figure. Hoffa's strength was his ability to negotiate. Under his leadership, the Teamsters became the largest labor union in the United States, with over 2 million members. He fought for better wages, pensions, and job security, and for many workers, he was a hero. But behind that success was another story. Hoffa also relied heavily on deals with organized crime. The Mafia had influence in the trucking industry, and Hoffa saw them as useful allies. He allowed mobsters to use the Teamsters pension fund for loans, which were often used to build casinos and finance mob businesses in Las Vegas. This relationship gave Hoffa power, but also tied his fate to dangerous men. By the 1960s, Hoffa was at the peak of his power. He could sway elections, control industries, and command loyalty across the nation. But his success brought enemies. Robert F. Kennedy, then Attorney General, made it his mission to bring Hoffa down. Kennedy believed Hoffa was corrupt and too close to the Mafia. Their rivalry was intense and public, with Kennedy grilling Hoffa in televised Senate hearings. Hoffa never wanted to back down, mocked Kennedy, and defended himself with sharp, cutting remarks. But the government's pressure was relentless. In 1967, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering, attempted bribery, and fraud. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison. For most men, this would have been the end, but Hoffa was not like most men. Even behind bars, he continued to pull strings. He remained the face of the Teamsters, though power inside the union began to shift to other figures, including Frank Fitzsimmons, who was seen as more cooperative with the mob. Hoffa was released from prison in 1971 after serving only 4 years, thanks to a pardon from President Richard Nixon. But there was a catch. Part of the deal barred Hoffa from participating in union activities until 1980. Hoffa, however, had no intention of stepping aside. He was determined to reclaim the leadership of the Teamsters, and this ambition put him on a collision course with both union rivals and his former mob allies. The Mafia, who now preferred working with Fitzsimmons, saw Hoffa as a threat. That brings us to July 30th, 1975. Hoffa woke up that morning in his Detroit home like any other day, but he had plans that would change history. He told his family he was going to meet with 2 men, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mob boss, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a powerful New Jersey Teamster with deep Mafia ties. Hoffa believed the meeting was about resolving disputes and possibly negotiating his return to power in the Union. At around 2:15 p.m., Hoffa arrived at the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a quiet suburb of Detroit. He parked his green Pontiac Granville and waited outside. Witnesses later recalled seeing him standing near the car, glancing at his watch, looking frustrated. He called his wife from a nearby payphone, complaining that the men were late. Hoffa was known for being punctual, and he expected others to be the same. As the hours passed, Hoffa remained in the parking lot, waiting for a meeting that may have already sealed his fate. By 3:30 p.m., Hoffa was still there. By 4 p.m., he was gone. His car was later found abandoned in the restaurant parking lot, unlocked, with no signs of struggle. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jimmy Hoffa, the man who once stood at the center of American labor power, feared by politicians and mobsters alike, had vanished into thin air. This was the beginning of one of the greatest mysteries in American history. When Jimmy Hoffa vanished on July 30th, 1975, it sent shockwaves through the country. This was not just any man going missing. This was a labor giant, a household name, and someone with powerful enemies. By late evening, Hoffa's family grew alarmed. His wife, Josephine, expected him home for dinner, but he never arrived. By nightfall, his children began calling friends and union contacts, trying to find him, when his car was discovered in the Machus Red Fox parking lot. Still locked, still clean, and with no trace of a struggle, panic set in. For someone as high profile as Hoffa, the silence around his disappearance was chilling. The FBI was immediately pulled into the case. Hoffa was already under watch for years, and his known ties to organized crime made the disappearance more than suspicious. Investigators pieced together the events of that afternoon. Hoffa told his family he was meeting with Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano, a feared mobster and longtime rival, and Anthony "Tony Jack" Giacalone, a Detroit mob leader known for his sharp suits and quiet ruthlessness. Both men denied ever meeting Hoffa that day. But Hoffa's confidence that he was meeting them suggests he either trusted the wrong people or walked straight into a trap. Provenzano, in particular, had a complicated history with Hoffa. The two men had once been close, but their relationship soured during Hoffa's time in prison. At one point, Hoffa accused Tony Pro of betraying him, and Provenzano allegedly threatened Hoffa's life. For Hoffa to sit down with Provenzano again was risky, but Hoffa may have believed he could outsmart or outnegotiate the mob. What he underestimated was how much the Mafia wanted him out of the way. The Teamsters were enormously valuable to organized crime. Through union pension funds and contracts, the mob had access to billions of dollars. With Frank Fitzsimmons as the new Teamsters president, mob families had an obedient partner who didn't make waves. Hoffa, however, was different. He was strong-willed, controlling, and had no problem challenging mob influence if it suited his goals. Many believe that the Mafia decided Hoffa was too dangerous to return. His very attempt to claw his way back into power sealed his fate. Witness accounts from that afternoon paint a mysterious picture. Some claim they saw Hoffa pacing in the parking lot, glancing at his watch, growing increasingly agitated. By 2:45 p.m., he made a frustrated phone call to his wife from a payphone, saying the men were late. Then, sometime between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m., he vanished. No screams, no struggle. No witnesses reported seeing him forced into a car. Yet, later FBI reports suggested that a maroon Mercury or a similar car owned by mob associate Charles "Chucky" O'Brien may have picked him up. O'Brien had once been close to Hoffa, almost like family, but in the years leading up to the disappearance, their relationship soured. The FBI quickly suspected that Hoffa had been lured into a meeting under false pretenses. Many mob experts believe Hoffa was picked up from the restaurant parking lot by men he trusted, possibly O'Brien or another associate, and driven to a house owned by the Mafia. There, he was likely killed within minutes. Some say he was strangled, others claim he was shot. What remains consistent in mob lore is that Hoffa's body was disposed of swiftly, leaving no trace. Despite the Mafia's code of silence, whispers began to spread in the underworld. Rumors circulated that Hoffa's body was buried under Giant Stadium in New Jersey, encased in cement. Others claimed he was chopped up and sent through a Detroit trash compactor, later burned in an incinerator. One mob insider insisted Hoffa was buried at a suburban Detroit farm. Decades later, FBI teams dug at all of these places, but nothing was ever found. Each search only deepened the mystery and fed public fascination. The FBI devoted massive resources to solving the case. Wiretaps, informants, surveillance. It all pointed back to the mob, but proving it in court was another matter. Neither Giacalone nor Provenzano was ever charged in connection with Hoffa's disappearance, though both men remained prime suspects. Provenzano was already serving time in prison for other crimes, and Giacalone maintained his innocence until his death. The lack of a body made prosecution nearly impossible, and the mob's silence ensured that no one would betray the truth. For the Hoffa family, the pain was unbearable. They had no answers, no closure, no remains to bury. To them, Hoffa was more than a union boss or a controversial figure. He was a husband, a father, and a grandfather. For his enemies, however, his disappearance was a clean solution. Without Hoffa, the Mafia tightened its grip on the Teamsters, and rival leaders no longer had to worry about his comeback. As the months turned into years, Hoffa's name became synonymous with mystery. Every new rumor sparked headlines. Where was Hoffa? Who killed him? Was it the Mafia, corrupt union officials, or even government agents? Theories multiplied, but facts were scarce. The man who once controlled millions of workers' fates had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions. And that was the power of the disappearance. It wasn't just a crime, it was a message. The Mafia had shown that even someone as powerful and well-known as Jimmy Hoffa could be erased without a trace. To this day, no one has been held accountable for his death. And in 1982, after 7 years of searching, Jimmy Hoffa was officially declared legally dead. Though his body has never been recovered, the case was now entering legend, moving beyond a crime story into American folklore. But for the FBI, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts, the hunt was far from over. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa would continue to haunt investigators and inspire countless theories for decades to come. After Jimmy Hoffa vanished on July 30th, 1975, the world refused to let his story fade. For decades, his name would echo through FBI offices, newsroom headlines, and late-night documentaries. The search for Hoffa became more than an investigation. It became an American obsession. The mystery had everything: power, betrayal, and the Mafia's shadowy hand. Yet no one, not even the FBI, could answer the question that haunted millions. What really happened to Jimmy Hoffa? In the first few years after his disappearance, the FBI launched what became known as a Hoffa's investigation, one of the largest in the Bureau's history. Hundreds of agents across multiple states were assigned to track every lead. They interrogated mobsters, wiretapped phones, and followed suspects from Detroit to New Jersey. Dozens of informants came forward, each claiming to know the truth, but every story contradicted the next. Some said Hoffa was shot in the head minutes after getting into a car. Others claimed he was strangled in a Detroit house owned by mob associate Carlo Licata. The only thing everyone agreed on was that Hoffa never left that meeting alive. By the early 1980s, the case had grown cold. Many of the original suspects were either dead, imprisoned, or too afraid to talk. The Mafia's code of silence, omerta, held strong. Even those who might have known something refused to risk their lives by revealing it. Without a body, the FBI could not prove murder. In 1982, after 7 long years of searching, a Michigan court officially declared Jimmy Hoffa legally dead. It was a formality, not closure. His family still had no grave to visit, no answers to ease their grief. But the world didn't stop searching. Over the decades, Hoffa's name became a riddle buried in American culture. Every few years, a new credible tip or deathbed confession would spark fresh interest. In 1989, hitman Donald Tony the Greek Franco's claimed Hoffa's body had been buried under the old Giant Stadium in New Jersey. The story caught fire. TV crews, journalists, and even comedians joked about Hoffa being buried under the end zone. But when the stadium was demolished in 2010, no remains were found. In 2003, the FBI excavated a Michigan horse farm once owned by mobster Frank Sheeran's associates. For weeks, heavy machinery dug up acres of land while cameras rolled. When the dig ended, agents found nothing. 2 years later, another search took place under a Detroit warehouse floor, based on an informant's claim that Hoffa had been crushed in an industrial compactor and buried in concrete. Again, nothing. Each time, hopes rose and fell, leaving behind the same unanswered questions. One of the most famous theories came from Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a former union official and hitman who claimed in his final years that he killed Hoffa himself. In his 2004 memoir, I Heard You Paint Houses, Sheeran said he was ordered by mob boss Russell Bufalino to lure Hoffa to a Detroit house under the pretense of a meeting. According to Sheeran, Hoffa trusted him enough to go. Once inside, Sheeran claimed he shot Hoffa twice in the back of the head. He said the body was later cremated at a nearby funeral home. The story inspired Martin Scorsese's 2019 film The Irishman, but even that version remains unverified. The FBI tested the house Sheeran mentioned and found traces of blood, But DNA results showed it wasn't Hoffa's. Through all of it, the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa became something bigger than any single crime. It became a mirror of America's uneasy relationship with power, corruption, and the underworld. Hoffa was both a symbol of labor's strength and its vulnerability. To some, he was a hero who fought for the working man. To others, he was a corrupt figure who played too close to the mob. Either way, his disappearance became one of the greatest symbols of organized crime's invisible reach. The idea that even the most powerful man could vanish without a trace. The FBI never officially closed the case. As late as 2013, investigators were still following tips. In 2021, they conducted yet another search beneath a landfill in Jersey City after a new witness claimed Hoffa's remains were buried there by the mob. The search gained national attention, but just like all those before it, it led nowhere. The dirt was empty, the mystery untouched. For Hoffa's family, the years brought sorrow but also acceptance. His daughter, Barbara Craneser, and his son, James P. Hoffa, who later became president of the Teamsters himself, both spoke of wanting the truth more than revenge. They simply wanted to know what happened. But time, as it always does, erased many of the people who might have known. The men involved are now dead, their secrets buried with them. Nearly 50 years later, Hoffa's name still sparks curiosity. His story has been retold in books, movies, and documentaries. Every generation rediscovers the case, drawn to its eerie silence and unanswered questions. It remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, not because of crime itself, but because of what it represents. The dark intersection of power, greed, and loyalty. Jimmy Hoffa once said, "You got a problem? Solve it. Don't run away." Yet, in the end, he became the problem no one could solve. His disappearance marked the end of an era, a time when labor bosses could rival politicians, and when the mob's influence reached into the highest levels of business and government. His life was a mix of triumph and corruption, his legacy forever divided between heroism and infamy. And so the story closes where it began. A parking lot in Bloomfield Township, a man waiting for a meeting that would never come. Decades later, all that remains are photographs, theories, and the haunting question that refuses to die. Where is Jimmy Hoffa?